Compounding interest, also dubbed as the eighth wonder of the world, holds the transformative power to really compound and grow your wealth over time. When you think and understand and harness the power of the compounding interest, you can really see financial independence and prosperity grow. And in this video, we're going to be looking at just that. To understand compounding interest, it is the interest that is accumulated on your investments, and it is compounded, adding to the principal, adding to the investment itself. At its very core, when you think of compounding interest, it is the principle of reinvestment. When you invest a sum of money, that money accumulates interest in a first period. That interest is reinvested, giving you a new total. This, of course, can exponentially go year over year, decade over decade, accelerating the snowball. And thinking about like our consolidation, when you do the snowball method, it does go and grow faster and faster and faster. We're going to look at some examples in this. But the benefits of starting early, this is where we really need to get into, starting at 18, starting at 22, starting at 25. The earlier that you start investing, the more you will see the compounding. And this really amplifies the effect that we see with it. Critical factor to wealth growth is putting money in. The critical factor to growth is putting money in, even if in smaller amounts, on regular contributions to savings or investment accounts to start that compounding. Now, when you start looking over decades, for young investors, if you're starting early, you can amass a small fortune by retirement with the contributions you're putting in there. Now, to really strategize and take full advantage of the compounding interest, you have to think of a couple things to consider when it comes to this strategy, starting with our first one, constant contributions. This is where when you think of a 401k, if you're getting employer match, regular adding to your investments every single paycheck will fuel the interest and the compounding effect that we have. Now, in addition to just the compounding, you can also see growth, you can see dividends, a lot of different things that you can see with the compounding growth, which is coupled by reinvesting all of the earnings. This is the point when you think of IRA accounts, when you think of 401k accounts. This is the reason why you don't have access to them and why you don't have access to them early. Also, it can be very detrimental if you are taking early withdrawals, not only for the fact that you're foregoing the compounding interest, but you're also going to be penalized for taking money out of there early. And the compounding is the growth, is the reinvestment of the earnings. Now, looking for high interest accounts. These are looking for accounts that are going to pay above average interest rates. Even now through M1 Finance, we have a link right down below. They do have a 5% high yield savings account, which is pretty good if you want to keep the money liquid as in an emergency fund, keeping it safe. But when you think of the higher interest you can accumulate, if you're putting it into the S&P 500, the higher the rate of return you're getting without really offsetting a lot of the risk. But knowing something that is invested, something is diversified, is going to make a really big difference when it comes to the compounding. And that's, of course, the utilization of the tax advantage accounts. These are the IRAs and the 401ks. Looking at the Roth variants. Now, when you think of the Roth versus the traditional, I always lean a lot more heavy towards the Roth variant, because when it comes to a Roth, you're going to get to a point where this compounding interest is going to exponentially grow, and you're going to have the ability to take the money out tax-free when you and after you see the compounding. When you see the compounding in a traditional plan, you do have to pay taxes when you take out contributions, which means when you get to the very, very high stages of compounding interest, guess what? You're going to be paying a lot of taxes on a much, much higher balance, which could be hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars more that you're going to be taxed on when you get to there. Now, when you think about compounding interest, as an investor that starts just investing $200 a month at the age of 25 is going to make a big difference. Thinking of a secondary investor that starts saving the exact same amount at 35, by the time both of these individuals do reach the age of 65, there's one that is going to have considerably more money because of the compounding interest. And we're going to look at that in just a minute. Now, of course, there are some very common mistakes that can derail the compounding interest, which comes in the form of delaying the investments. When you think of even starting 10 years later, that $200 being able to actually compound and roll into itself as it grows is kind of crazy when you start breaking out the math with a compound interest calculator, which again is exactly what we're going to be looking at. Early withdrawals was another one that we kind of touched on. If you're taking out early withdrawals, it is going to disrupt the principal and disrupt the compounding, the process that you do want to get through a ton of different years. And we have to remember the fees. This is one of the big things when we think of ETFs, when we think of investing in, the VOO, the Vanguard S&P 500. When you think of a very, very low fee structure of a 0.03, it makes a big difference when you're putting it in mutual funds and they're charging you 1%, 1.5% if you have it with a financial advisor. that is paying you the exact same. You're paying them another percent over the course of a extended amount of time. You will see a massive difference in the portfolio from just investing and forgetting it, like I said, with the VOO, putting it into ETFs, which have an incredibly low cost. So let's hop over. I want to look at the calculator, show you exactly what it looks like. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so here we are at investor.gov. It is one of my absolute favorite compound interest calculators that we do have. Very, very straightforward. So again, we're going to run through the two scenarios. Scenario A has a person that is 25 years old. Initial investing is nothing. So we just got out of college. We finished. We're in our first career. We're making 18. We're making $25,000 a year as you get out of college. Initial investment is zero. We are putting $200 in there. We are age 25 and we're going to go all the way to 65. So we do have that full 40 years of compounding interest. And the estimated interest rate we're going to put at 10%. That is the estimated interest rate of the S&P 500 over an extended amount of time. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, but overall looking at that estimation of the interest rate of 10%, we're not going to have a variance because again, we want to kind of keep where we're at with our interest rate, and the compounding is going to be frequency of annual. So we're going to go ahead and calculate this, and looking at just putting it in there, zero for our initial investing, but starting with that $200, you have $1 million. That is right. In 40 years, you are going to be a millionaire. That means through all of the time from age 25 to 65, you only put in $200. When you got raises, you stuck with $200. When you got promotions, you moved up a job. When you got to the point of your career, you were only putting in $200, and you have been doing this for exactly 40 years in this scenario. Now, thinking of the person two or person B, when we think of it starting to invest in 35, and the reason why we use 35 is that is about the average age when people start thinking about investing. They start planning a lot more. They start seeing a future, a family. A lot of things do come by the time that you are 35. So we are cutting 10 years off of this equation. That $1 million calculation you had right there now goes to $400,000. When you think of, in its entirety, we're cutting off 25% of the years. So instead of doing those 40 years, we're doing 30 years. But you can see that we have more than half what we have in the compounding interest. And of course, when you start thinking of the variance of this, and when you start thinking of the time that you have to put in here, if you're putting more money into this, it is just going to compound more and more and more and greater, and the snowball gets bigger and bigger. That is why, again, I love the compounding interest. So even thinking where I'm at, so just as of today, thinking of a 401k projection, we're at about 380. So that is where we're at. Now, I do make contributions, which again, higher amount. We don't have any debt. We're putting in about $600 a paycheck, which means $1,200 a month. So putting in a pretty decent amount. And right now, if I stayed the path that we have right now, I have 20 years. So right now I'm 45. We're looking at 65. Again, staying at that 10% ratio. But looking when you start doing the math, you're talking $3.3 million if I stay the course for the next 20 years. Which of course, even looking at this number right here, this doesn't include 401k contributions, this doesn't include the employer match that you might get from a company. This is just base contributions. Now, for a majority of people, of course, this is a very, very extenuating circumstance where you do have a lot of money to put into an investment account. And overall, the reason why I can do this is I don't have debt. I don't have car payments. I don't have credit card payments. I don't have student loans. The thing that I focused on really at the beginning to get the snowball rolling was the elimination and really getting rid of debt. When it comes to cars, buying used cars. When it comes to anything that we can get cheaper, anywhere that we can cut money, we have cut corners in our entirety, still living life, still doing vacations, everything of that nature. But when you get to the point of earning more income, again, when you think of a contribution, let's say even with a match, we're at roughly, I would say about $2,000 a month. You're talking employer matches, which we get a very, very healthy match. But looking in the total of this, thinking next 20 years, you're talking almost $4 million. And you can see this is where the divergence comes from, is the contributions are going up. You can see they're kind of increasing, but you'll notice that contributions are staying very consistent. I mean, at 2,000, we're putting in, what is that? 2,000 a month. So that's 24,000 a year over 12 months. So even thinking of that is staying very, very consistent in the contributions, 1.9, 2.1. So even thinking right there. So when you're looking at year 13, going into year 14, you're looking at almost what, $214,000 of growth. Then the 214 goes to 2,349,000. So when you start getting to these higher numbers, it compounds faster and faster and faster. This is the reason when you think of Warren Buffett, when you think of the amount of money he has, the compounding didn't really take effect and continues to take effect when he hit about 65. That is when, he got to a pinnacle of having millions of dollars. When you start compounding millions of dollars, which is kind of crazy. So let's say even at like $5 million, when you start thinking of the compounding factor and the compounding exponentially that you have again over time, because I believe right now he is 90. So even thinking, let's say 65 to 85. So we'll do over those 20 years. We're not making any contributions. We're just letting this thing grow. And even there, you're talking 5 million into $33 million in the course of 20 years, which again is crazy when you start looking at the exponential growth and when you start thinking about the compounding interest that you can actually acquire. And the sooner that you do this, even if you start off thinking younger, when you're looking at about a 40-year runway, guys, anything you put in there, even if you're putting, let's say you can afford $100 a month, thinking of retirement, thinking in the entirety, you're still looking at $500,000. Even, I'm kind of wondering at what point, even if we put $50 in there, 265, you are still over the majority, the average that we have for the investment accounts in America at 265, and you're putting away $50. How many places could you scrounge to get $50? And I know, again, it is over a very big length of time, but when you think bigger picture, when you think of your entire your entire career, putting away $50 a month is still going to give you, $265,000, which result in having more than a majority of Americans do have when it comes to retirement. All right, guys, this is definitely a cool, very, very cool tool to play around with. Check it out. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. And as always, thank you guys for watching.